So, hi everyone. Today I have got the lovely Kerry McGregor with me. And Kerry and I have known each other for a really long time. We actually did our yoga teacher training with each other back 10 years ago to this year, actually, which is amazing. And Kerry is one of the loveliest yoga teachers out there that you will find, and she really knows her stuff. And I'm super excited to have her here to chat with us today. Kerry, welcome.
Hey, Erica. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Pleasure. So can you tell us a little bit about you and the work that you do in this world?
Sure. Well, as you said, we trained together, and I think the connection that you and I made was obviously around our curiosity. And so for me, the yoga practice has been a real journey of evolution. My passion when I teach other people is getting them to tap into the same level of curiosity, to be excited by it, not just to be sitting there waiting to receive, listening to what I'm saying and thinking it's gospel. That's kind of the least desirable outcome for me. I want to create students' capacity to reclaim their autonomy.
Yes.
I'm fascinated by the human body's capacity for movement. And the ability for us to really connect with something deep inside of ourselves when we're prepared to look in, rather than work to the shape, work to the pose, or be in service to the pose, to turn it inside out and use the pose as a doorway into ourselves. So I was recently called a yoga disruptor from a new student
That's so good.
who was a little disconcerted by the fact that I was going, but what if that didn't have to be a rule? So I guess I like breaking some of the traditional rules and finding out what happens.
Yeah, I love that. And you know I share that passion with you.
Yeah.
Rules were there to be broken, I believe.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for that introduction. And one of the things that I know that you and I do share is this belief around how movement really can help us to build our physical body in terms of strength, flexibility, resilience, and to kind of fine tune, I guess, some of the ways that we move so that we move with greater ease in our everyday world. But you said something the other day that I wrote down as a quote because it was actually really beautiful. And I was hoping that you could talk about, I'm going to say the quote in a second, but talk about a little bit how our physical practice, something that we can really connect with quite, I want to say easily, but it's not always easy, but something that is very grounded in, feeling. We can feel what's going on in our body, how that actually can impact us beyond our body. So the quote that you so eloquently put out there was, giving attention to the subtleties broadens our perspective. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, look, I think it is interesting. You're right that a physical practice can be a very tangible way in, I think. Perhaps for people whose attention is often so outward with the demands on them, it allows them to anchor and ground themselves, as you said. Subtleties are so fascinating. I think we so often in our day-to-day life paint in very broad strokes. And when we dive down to the subtleties, we begin to, in movement, we begin to understand little nuances about ourselves. So I think for me personally, I might just kind of roll it back a little. For me, when I stopped trying to push so hard, I started to notice things beneath the surface that hadn't been in my awareness. And when I was less intent on creating the bigger, broader movements, I realized that there were so many multiple layers to a movement in those little subtleties, breaking it down into those little components. And then as I played with that more, and initially from a very anatomical point of view, can I refine the movement? Can I iron out any kinks? This muscle's a bit, overreactive or something like that, that I started to notice the way I responded mentally to those things as well. And that was a fascinating thing because I started to notice, I guess, inner kind of conditioning and programming that ran very deep around my value, sense of self-value. If you kind of grew up in my generation, I'm a good bit older than you, of your value being around doing, constant doing. And that if you weren't doing anything, you were lazy. At school, if you were contemplating something, you were daydreaming. Yeah. And there wasn't the space for those quiet, reflective things to be seen as valuable. You had to be creating output. It's kind of the industrial age worker mentality. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess, that has been such a fascinating journey, and it never seems to stop. It's like Alice in Wonderland down the rabbit hole. It's every time there's different layers. And I guess I have a lot of students who, when they've worked with me for a while, really start to tap into that and notice that they're understanding themselves better. They're noticing their, I guess, patterns of reacting to certain things or judging certain things. And it opens up the capacity to be more open-minded, to invite that kindness and the curiosity that you and I are both so keen on seeing come out in people's practice. So it's kind of a bit like magic sometimes, really.
It really is, isn't it? I love that.
It is, yeah.
So I'm curious to know, because I know that in the work that you do often work with people who are, training in other modalities as well. And I know for myself as well, like I really like to weight train, and that could be seen as counter, I suppose, to what we're doing in the yoga room. I don't believe it is, and I don't think you do either.
Not at all.
But I would be curious to know how you've seen this play out for some of your students in terms of when they shift the focus from that external, push, shape, chasing, that sort of thing, into that more mindful, grounded, introspective practice. How that has potentially changed both the way they experience movement, but also the outcomes that they're achieving?
Yeah, sure. So let me see if I can sum this up a little bit, because it's very complex. It's very interesting to see. In my experience to date, and this is both my own personal experience and what I'm seeing unfold as I use this kind of mixed modality training more, is that in traditional yoga, when we're chasing the shape, we're so concerned with the external that we're not really reading the messages of our body about how much a pose might suit us, turning ourselves into a pretzel. I know you and I have both had people go, oh, I'd like to try yoga, but I'm not flexible enough. And the first thing they think of is flexibility. And I see a lot of common links between people who really value flexibility in a traditional yoga sense with people who don't have particularly good personal boundaries, and they end up twisting them out of shape in a whole lot of other relationships and actually making themselves feel vulnerable. When we're strength training, flexibility can be a problem. Flexibility is a range of motion you might have at a joint in any area of the body. Mobility is your functional use of that joint. So I might be able to get into an incredibly deep lunge, but if I haven't got the strength to get myself out of it safely or stay in it safely, then it's such high risk. And it's high risk physically, but if you translate that to the concept of how you react in your life, it's also incredibly high risk that you burn yourself out. You overextend yourself literally at the joint, and then in your capacity to meet your own needs as well as everyone else's around you. When we look for mobility, there is a range of healthy motion, but there is support and structure to make it sustainable and functional. And I think we have, as teachers, a real duty to open up a dialogue with students about the capacity to change their thinking of their value of flexibility and shift it to mobility. Does that
Yeah,
make
that's
sense?
great. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I love that. One thing that I talk a lot about is this idea of, using your practice to practice accepting support. And sometimes, in that, what you're talking about, if we're hanging out into our end ranges, and trying to get into the deepest expression of a pose that we can manage. I love what you've said about that, sort of reflecting perhaps your boundaries outside of that capacity as well. But I also think it's very resistant to accepting and using support, and finding that balance between the pushing and the giving and the receiving as well. So it's interesting how those life lessons can be learnt through this very kind of tactical, is that the right word? But this really tangible kind
like
of
tactile,
tactile, yeah, tactile was what I meant. It's interesting how it extends.
Yeah, I definitely have, and I'm pretty sure you and I have talked about this before. Students who believe that using a prop is somehow cheating.
Yeah, I hear that all the
Like they're
time.
getting out of something.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's such an interesting thing to think
Yeah.
that placing your hand on a block or putting a bolster beneath you is somehow cheating. And I see a really direct correlation there with people who believe that, with the same people who never ask for help, who drive themselves to the point of absolute breakdown, and are so diminished and depleted in their lives because they never put in place support systems to top themselves back up. I would regularly say to students, fit your own oxygen mask before helping those around you. I am your flight attendant. It's like
exits are here.
It's so important. Yeah. But it doesn't happen.
No, yeah, you're right. And it's interesting because my view of props is that instead of them representing this opportunity to cheat, they actually open up the door to so much deeper exploration, because you're working within a capacity that you've got some control over, which is really awesome. So that actually segues beautifully into my next question, which is this idea that we do inherently, and I think most of us do this, I think it's pretty standard, where we really put ourselves at the bottom of the pile. And I think that we are intellectually very cognizant of the fact that that is backwards, but we don't seem to, like, it hasn't sunk into our being. We don't really understand it until perhaps we make that shift. And what you've already talked about beautifully points in the direction of why perhaps that shift could happen, and what benefits we'd get from that. But from a practical point of view, what are some of the ways that you've seen work, either for yourself or for the people that you're working with, to actually prioritize it, not give it lip service? Because it's like one thing to be like, well, tomorrow I'm going to start, and then tomorrow turns into tomorrow. Versus actually making that tangible kind of line in the sand moment where you go, right, I am a priority now, and I'm going to prove it. Have you got any tips around that?
It's a really
question.
Tough one. Because I think, to be honest, it's something we all struggle with every day.
100%.
For me, that I might kind of wind the question back a step or two, because I guess for me, the recognition for me that I wasn't doing that enough came by subtly changing, well, actually not subtly changing what I did for a while. I had an injury that meant that I had to do some real rebuilding for strength, and started doing strength training, as you know, which had been so outside the realm of anything I'd ever done. I'd been deep in the well of soft, gentle, somatic stuff, which I love and continue to love. But when I started strength training, I started to notice shifts in my psyche, and that opened up a whole other doorway. And I'm a single mum. I've raised the girls on my own they're in their 20s now, from when they were really little. And that is a time where you often don't have a lot of support and you feel a little frantic. And when I started strength training and suddenly started lifting fairly heavy weight, and I say heavy, it's heavy in context of what I'd lifted before, but to get to a point of being able to lift my body weight was psychologically so powerful to be able to go, I can lift me, I can support me, I can do me. And then recognizing that on the very next day, I might need to get a pile of bolsters and do some beautiful restorative somatic work, and understanding the flow between them. Definitely the capacity that you had inside of yourself. And that was like a crossroads for me of understanding how to value myself in all levels of my capacity. On the days where previously I would have thought, oh, am I being a little pathetic to do something gentle? This isn't enough. I'm not enough. And to value just as strongly on a day where I felt like, yeah, I'm going to lift 80 kilos now.
Yeah.
And so I guess in that little exploration that I had, I recognized how important that window of the physical exploration of coming to the mat, no matter what my state, whether it was going to be really subtle somatic or restorative stuff, or whether it was going to be the deadlift, and show up for myself, explore what I was on the day, and be really accepting and loving and kind to myself about it. And so I've started saying to students, I guess, since that journey, you know, every time you come to the mat, we pause. We spend 10 minutes at the start of a session really acknowledging where we're at, why we've arrived, what we need, how to meet those needs. And over a period of time, those students are starting to go, I know now exactly why I'm coming to the mat. I'm showing up for myself, to meet myself and not judge myself. And whatever is present, I'm going to explore that again without judgment of whether there's more value in this than that.
Yeah, I love
I think
that.
I've kind of gone in a bit of a funny circle with that.
No,
But fingers
that's beautiful.
crossed that. Yeah.
No, that's really good, because, you know, it's interesting because I think about this question a lot. Because one of the things that comes up time and time again with my community is that it's not so much about knowing what to do, it's about knowing how to fit it in, right? And I very much believe that a big piece of that is how we see ourselves, you know, and also that recognition of the difference, you know, like if I do commit to this practice, I feel a certain way. And if I don't do it, I feel this other way. And then kind of like picking which way do you want to feel? And, you know, making choices that take you in the direction that you want to go. And I think that, I think it's so multifaceted, and I love that you took that direction with it, because it's not really clear cut. It's not just, you know, I always say, like, put it in your diary, because if it's not in there, it's not going to happen. But it's more than that, because if you put it in your diary, but at the core of you, you don't believe that it's worth your time, then it doesn't matter if you write it down or not.
Yeah, or if it's worthy enough.
Or if you're worthy enough.
Well, I might make the time to do it, but is it going to be enough? Am I, you know?
Yeah.
So there's a really complex webbing around it. I know in my last year or so of work, and I've gotten busier and busier, that if I do not make the time for my practice and my exploration, I'm not as good a teacher.
Yeah.
Because I'm not feeling the multidimensionality of the possibilities. I'm tapped out. I'm exhausted. I have to come back into myself for my practice, whatever form that takes, in order to be able to show up for my students as well. Because otherwise I'm depleted.
Yeah. And doesn't that extend... that extends beautifully out into, you know, maybe you're not a teacher out there, but you are a parent, or you are a partner, or you are a sibling or a child. And, you know, it makes you recognize, like, I am not the mother I like myself to be if I am not looking after myself. And it only takes a few times of things going pear-shaped in my world for me to go, hang on, I'm seeing a pattern here. And, you know, you start to, and it's taking responsibility for that, isn't it, too? Because, you know that you are the only one who can actually then make the decision to go and take that time. Like, nobody's riding in on a horse to come and save you from yourself. You've got to be the one that commits to doing that practice. Even if you've got all of the support in the world, you have to put the pieces in place and then go out and do the thing that is going to bring you that
Yes.
joy and that pleasure.
And there's a level of self-respect, I think, with the boundary setting that's required to be able to say, I'll be with you shortly. However, right now, I need to do this.
Yes.
And then I will be the better for it.
Yeah.
So definitely, I've had a lot of students say to me after a period of time, and some of them only a couple of months, some of them a little longer, I'm nicer to my partner now.
Yeah.
My relationship is better because I'm kinder to my partner.
And to
they
themselves,
realize,
most likely.
well, I was about to say
Yeah.
it's because they realize they're kinder to themselves. It's very hard to be kind to other people for too long if you're not being kind to yourself. You end up being a martyr.
Yeah.
You end up getting a bit bitter and twisted. So I think it is the kindest thing. And to be fair, years ago, my kids would tell me 10 years ago, when we were first training and in those early years of teaching, they would look at me sometimes and go, Mum, I think you haven't probably done a yoga practice for you. And they'd be like 12 and telling me this. They were very cognizant of the fact that I was a different person if I didn't get my practice in. So I think, my encouragement definitely to all of my students is fit your own oxygen mask first, because everything in your life comes first. I work out with my personal trainer every week. And it is a financial commitment that I literally put in line underpaying my rent. The second step is paying my trainer. And it's because I show up every week, regardless of how much sleep I've had, how well I've eaten. And I know that it brings me back into alignment. It allows me to focus on myself, to dive down in this practice and explore where I'm at. And it is the very key to me showing up every week for myself. I know that it works for me. It gives me the strength to do everything else. And at that stage of my life, that strength is a foundation that then gives me the space to explore subtleties as well. And everyone's combination is different. A few years ago for me, the most important thing was a very gentle somatic practice. There's no way I could or should have done strength work. So I'm not saying the strength work is the only way to go. I'm saying know yourself well enough, spend enough time exploring where you are at to know what it is you need, and then devote your time to it so that you are being kind to yourself by giving yourself exactly what you need and making that a priority. Because everything else that you want to be for everyone else flows from that point. And it really does.
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you. I love that. So I'm going to wrap us up, but can you tell everybody where they can get more of your beautiful wisdom? Where can we find you?
Sure. Okay. So you can find me at Koru Yoga Kerry McGregor on Facebook. I don't post there as often as I should at the moment, but you can always ask me questions there. I'm managing a gym actually up in Emerald in the hills in the Dandenong Ranges at the moment, Oslo Health and Fitness. And I am going to be doing a lot more workshops out of that space and surrounding areas. So please make contact with us there. And I'd love to answer questions. I'd love to collaborate with yourself and people who share that goal of getting people to step out of the tram tracks of that rigid linear progression of movement and start to connect to the subtleties and to the nuances and to how that might impact your life in more ways than physical.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So anyone who's in the hills in Victoria, absolutely check out Kerry's work. And I will make sure I pop all of the relevant links so that you can easily do that as well. So thank you so much, Kerry, for taking the time to chat with me. I am always so grateful for your time and for your friendship. And I hope you have an awesome day.
You too. Thanks, Erica.
Bye.
Bye.